Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne-pestana, and we're here today with special guest, Minda Zetlin, who's here to share with us her new book, Care SelfCare. Find your happiness, success, and fulfillment at work. So Minda is the author of the highly popular Laid Back Leader column for Inc.com. Her articles and workshops offer research-backed advice to help ambitious people get the most out of their careers and their lives. So welcome to the show, Minda Zetlin.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. So what inspired you to write it?
Well, for more than a decade, I've been writing a column called The Laid Back Leader for the website of Inc. magazine, Inc.com. Inc., if you're not familiar with it, is for entrepreneurs and people aspiring to be entrepreneurs, but really everyone who wants to work a little bit better. And so as I was writing this column, I was writing quite a lot of columns, and I found that the ones that were about these questions of work-life balance and how we can be more productive and how we can have a great career and a good life without making ourselves miserable, which is how I tend to describe the book. Those topics were really getting a lot of interest from our readership. And so I started writing about them more. And I started using some of this advice on myself and seeing that it really made a difference. And it grew up into a book.
Well, I know Inc. magazine, and it is a fabulous business magazine. It's something that I actually read, here and there as time goes on. But it has me kind of thinking, has this really kind of evolved since there's been so much changes in the workplace?
From my point of view, the pandemic accelerated some things that were kind of already happening in terms of the workplace. That business of meeting virtually and spending half our lives on Zoom, that was kind of beginning to happen to me before. I think maybe the biggest change from the pandemic is that the default became video chat like Zoom instead of phone, but a lot of it was kind of already happening. And a lot of the what I call the disappearing line between work and life, where work intrudes on life more and more, but also we bring our life to work more and more. I think that's been happening for a long time.
Well, it's good to get that feedback, especially from an expert. And so when you bring together self-care and careers, so how is that coming together?
I think it actually comes together very, very well. To the benefit of both, and both your career life and your work life, if I could put it that way. And a lot of people that I've talked to have essentially told me the same thing, that in fact, in order to do our jobs well and to really shine and excel at what we do, we ourselves need to be in a good place. The way I like to put it is happy, healthy, and at ease. Now, obviously, you're not always at ease and you're not always happy in the course of your workday, but it's an important goal. There's a lot of research that shows that the happier we are and the better we feel, the better we are at just about everything we do, the better decisions we make, the more we're able to be creative. So if you have a job that requires any kind of decision making or any kind of creativity, which I hope is most of us, taking your life, your work-life balance seriously, your self-care seriously, will actually contribute to your career success. And I know it because I've seen it work for me, and I've seen it work for so many other people who went from 7 days a week, oh, there's always so much more to do, oh, I can never get everything done, but I'm going to try, to setting healthier boundaries on work and finding that in fact, their careers took off at that point.
Do you find that most people feel that they get kind of stuck in, I should be doing this, I should be doing that, and so their work-life balance kind of becomes so unbalanced?
Yes. And by the way, I mean, I kind of get into this in my book, but by the way, at least for me, and I think for a lot of people, maybe especially a lot of women, this should and this constant, oh, you didn't get this done, oh, you didn't get that done, oh, you're a bad person, doesn't just apply to work. I mean, one of the things I confess to in the book is that my kitchen is a mess, and it's always a mess, and I always feel bad about it. And someday I should follow the advice of Oliver Berkman, who wrote a fantastic book called 4,000 Weeks, and say, I'm just going to choose to fail at having a neat kitchen because I'm going to succeed at some other things instead. It's often so hard to do that. And when we pile on all the stuff we think we need to do at work and all the stuff we think we need to do in the rest of our lives, it becomes impossible.
So how do we get to this place where we can, balance that and just still feel comfortable about giving ourselves self-care? Because I think a lot of people are kind of at this place where self-care is kind of a afterthought or something that they have to, designate a special spa day to go do.
Yeah, right. Well, all right. Well, let's stop and talk for a second about what self-care actually is. I love spa days. I have a monthly standing date with a friend of mine for a spa day every month, and we just did it this week. I love, hot baths with bath salts and massages and, long walks in the woods and all that stuff absolutely is self-care. But so is anything that makes you feel refreshed and whole, and especially anything that takes you away from the stuff that, you worry about and it's kind of gnawing at your mind throughout your day and your week. So that could be going for a hike. That could be going to a movie. That could be hanging out with your pals, which is an extremely important thing to do for many reasons and might actually lengthen your life, by the way. Hanging out, spending time with friends, people you care about. It could be all kinds of things, but it is so important to fit those things into your day. And the thing is, I think the way to get there, truthfully, is to take small steps and experiment, because you're right. It's very hard to just go, okay, I'm going to drop my commitment to all these things, even if that commitment's only in my own head. I'm going to drop making sure to answer every email. I'm going to drop making sure to vacuum every other day or whatever. I'm going to drop those things because, I know I can. It takes a while to figure out that you can. So, maybe just drop one thing. Maybe don't check your email right before you go home from work, or don't check your email until an hour before you go home from work. Maybe, load the dishwasher tomorrow instead of today. I don't, it's different for everybody, but sometimes taking a small step in this direction and seeing how that works for you can help you slowly get there. But I think the important thing is to really understand how important it is to take care of yourself first in order to take care of all the other things that you want to do. Because if you can't show up as your best self, then you're not helping anybody and you're not advancing your own work as much as you may think you are.
That's such wise advice. So I know that you talk about, you've got all these great things in regards to how we create roadblocks. How do we get over those, and how do we set better limits for ourselves?
Well, setting limits is hard. I mean, the story I like to tell about this, and I think it's in the book too, is Christmas around Christmas a few years ago, I read news accounts about a woman in Indonesia who was in her 20s, and she was working in a advertising agency, and she literally worked herself to death. But it became, and I was so naive at that time that I did not realize it was physically possible to work yourself to death at a desk job. Turns out I was wrong about that. And turns out she probably isn't the first person to have done that, but it became international headlines because she posted it on Twitter as she was working herself to death. So she would post, oh, it's so unusual for me to be home from work before midnight. Or, oh, I'm sitting here working away on a Friday night at 2:00 in the morning with 9 other people who do the same kind of work as me. And actually, I don't really mind that. And on the last day of her life, she tweeted 30 hours a week and still going strong. And that strong had like 3 O's in it. And that was the last tweet she ever sent. And then she collapsed and she died. And to me at the time, it was like this horrific wake-up call because I wasn't working 30 hours at a time. I don't think, I could, even if I was drinking energy drinks like she was. But I was working too much and I wasn't taking days off at all. And my husband was really frustrated with his inability to get me to talk to him, even though I worked at home and we were both home all day. And I sort of realized, this isn't going to work for me. I got to make some changes. Around the same time, I interviewed someone who strongly made the case in terms of brain health and productivity for having one completely work-free day, at least one, every week. And so that's where I started. That was the first boundary I set for myself. And I was amazed at how helpful it actually was. And that kind of started me on the path of prioritizing some of the stuff for myself. And the more I did it, the more I saw that it really worked.
So you talk about just brain health. What was the science behind that? Because I think a lot of times people, they may hear advice from experts, but sometimes the science is what really kind of gets them.
The science is what gets them. And I apologize for not having all the research right at my fingertips. So I'm going to do this from recollection. But certainly if all the things you're trying to get done, first and foremost, if all the things you're trying to get done are in any way affecting your ability to get a healthy amount of sleep every night, and a healthy amount of sleep is at least 7 hours for almost everyone, and probably 8, and sleeping for 7 or 8 hours means spending a little bit more time than that in bed, because you obviously don't fall asleep the instant you get into bed, and you usually don't wake up the instant you get out of bed. If anything that you're doing, including, going to the gym in the morning and getting a workout, is preventing you from having those hours of sleep, that's the first thing that brain science tells you really need to change. And it's really important because, first of all, people who are sleep deprived, and sleep deprived, by the way, comes from sleeping 6 hours a night. If you sleep 6 hours a night for, I think it's 10 days, research shows you are as impaired as if you had drunk alcohol, or as impaired as if you had stayed up all night. You cannot function well on that amount of sleep. Almost no one in the population can. So you start making not only are you more at risk for road accidents, just as if you've been drinking, but you start making bad decisions. You become a much worse boss, partner, parent, and so forth, because your ability to really hear and properly communicate with people is impaired. Your creativity is impaired. Your ability to do your job well is impaired. And most frighteningly of all, for anyone who's ever watched anyone go through Alzheimer's disease, your risk of Alzheimer's is way increased. While you sleep, your brain actually pulsates and clears out the beta amyloids that cause Alzheimer's. But it only does this if you achieve deep sleep, and you only can achieve deep sleep if you have enough hours of uninterrupted sleep to get there. So that's the first and most important thing. And everyone should be paying attention to that science. And please Google the science of sleep research if you want to know any more about any of this, or take a look at my book. So that's the first thing. Another piece of science, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to describe this as well as I would like, has to do with the importance for your brain of taking breaks in terms of both learning and creativity. There's part of your brain that works when you're directly focused on something and paying attention to it. there's a part of your brain that's working on that. When you take your focus off whatever it is and relax and go do something, fun and unconnected, or just rest, a different part of your brain goes to work. And that part of your brain both solidifies learning and makes the kinds of connections that really are creativity. Creativity most often is the making of new and interesting connections inside our minds. And by the way, your brain needs to make those new connections and those new pathways to make it more resilient, both towards things like Alzheimer's and everything else. That's a bit more brain science. I actually got to experience this myself in a really strange way. Years ago, when for our anniversary, my husband and I took a Segway tour, and I had never been on a Segway in my life. And we got on the Segways, and he took to it like a duck to water. He was zooming around, and I was okay, but I wasn't that great on the Segway. I couldn't really keep up with him and the tour guide. It was just the two of us and the tour guide. And then about an hour into our Segway tour, we stopped at the little park that was scheduled to be on the tour and just sat around and chatted for half an hour. Unbelievably, when I got back on that Segway, all of a sudden I could ride it. Something had happened in the back of my brain when I was able to take my attention off it for just a few minutes that suddenly made it come clear. That those kinds of connections happen. They can happen all the time, but only when we give ourselves the chance to take a break.
Well, thank you for answering all that. I know I put you on the hot seat there a little bit. So I apologize. But you've got such great information in your book. And I can understand why so many people write in and are asking these questions and wanting to gain a greater understanding. And it's interesting. You often hear people say, well, I'm working 60 hours a week or 80 hours a week. I mean, are they getting more done than someone that works 40?
Research at Stanford says that they're not. I don't know if you did something purely mechanical where like your entire job was to lift a box and set it on top of something and then do it again and do it again and do it again. Maybe you could get more done in 60 hours than 40, although I don't think so. But for knowledge work, research from Stanford shows that actually the optimum efficiency is no more than 40 hours a week. And if you work longer than that, you probably are not getting more done. Elon Musk, I just recently saw a commencement speech where Elon Musk said, well, it's simple math. If someone else is working 50 hours a week and you're working 100 hours a week, you're going to get twice as much done. Well, much though I respect Elon Musk as a scientist, he's way off base with that one, as I think all of us kind of instinctively know. I think we all kind of instinctively know that if all we do is wake up in the morning, because that's about what that 100 hours would be, right? Since you're going to spend some amount of time sleeping. If you wake up in the morning, start working and continue working right up until the point you fall asleep, and then do it again and do it again every day for 7 days, you're not going to be getting twice as much work done.
That would be really rough. That would be really rough. Well, and let's say someone has a boss like that. How can they talk to them about, developing this better work-life balance?
I think that can be really challenging. You could buy your boss a copy of my book, I suppose. But other than that, I think that can be really challenging. And I think it is going to depend a lot on the culture of an individual workplace and also of an industry at large. It's very hard. And it's particularly hard when you're probably dealing with coworkers who think more like Elon Musk, and they think, they can spend every single day at work. And then if you have small children and your coworkers, are single and free, they can often put in those hours in a way that you can't. But there's a lot of research that also shows that parents are better leaders and better bosses because the lessons that we learn as parents translate into our workplace lives. But in terms of having a boss, I'll be more efficient if you allow me to go home at 5 o'clock every day. Might be a harder sell than to be specific about what you need and what you'll get done. I commit to doing this, but I need this much time off, or I need to set this boundary, and I'm sorry, but that's just the way it has to be. I can't work on Saturday this weekend. I can't do one more task today because my schedule is full and I have to leave at a reasonable time. And then, you fill it in on the other end. You show by your work how good you are. And if you care about your job and if you feel good while you're doing your job, the odds are you will do excellent and your job is a good match for you, which they aren't always. Then chances are your work will speak for itself. But having said that, there are places where the expectations are out of line, and there are certainly bosses who are horribly unreasonable. And if that's the situation you're in, then that's a whole different challenge. And, one you should think about dealing with. That doesn't mean go out and quit, but it does mean to do something or try to do something to make your work better for you.
Yes, develop some boundaries if possible, and at least start the conversation about one's needs. Is what I got from your book.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's a more efficient way of putting it. And if you're stuck in a job that doesn't work for you for whatever reason, which is a question that seems to come up a lot, even in times like these where there's economic uncertainty, you may or may not feel like you can leave your job, but often just changing the parameters of your job can make a big difference. Getting projects that you really care about, finding ways to get rid of tasks that you really hate, finding maybe making a lateral move to work for a different boss. Often people who hate their jobs really hate the people that they're working with, and most especially the people they're working for, and then just making an adjustment to that can make a big difference. So it can be hard if you have a job with unreasonable expectations, or you have a job that isn't a good fit for you for whatever reason. But that doesn't mean some other job won't be a good fit for you. And it doesn't mean that you should just grin and bear it. You may or may not be in a position to just leave your job and, it flip to say, oh, well, if this doesn't work for you, go find a different job. Well, some people can do that. Some people can't. But whoever you are, whatever you do, you can at least try to figure out how you can make it better.
Definitely get the conversation going. In your book, you talk about showing up to work as ourselves. What do you mean by that?
I think most of us, especially when we're younger, come to work and put on, not only whatever our work clothes are, but also persona that we think is expected of us at work. Along the way to doing this, I interviewed a man who is now an image consultant. And when he first started his corporate job, he was working in a big consulting firm, and he's Black and he's gay. And he felt the only Black gay man in the universe at the job and in the industry where he was. And so he came to work very buttoned down, wearing suits and, starched white shirts and acting, super uber professional. And he said he did well at his job, but he wasn't doing well at being him. And that translates into how people see you and understand you at work. So the wake-up call for him was when he got a performance review that said that he was very good at his job, but his team that was reporting to him at that point, his team didn't know who he was. When the people you work with don't know who you are, it's tough to inspire them. It's tough to really get them to do their best work for you. Or, if you're talking about someone that you work for, it's tough to get them to really trust you with a big project or a big responsibility. So the more you can break down that barrier between who you are at work and who you really are, the more I think you can really engage in your own heart with your job, and also with the people that you work with, because work really ultimately is always about people and about relationships, almost 100% of the time. So when you bring yourself to work, when you bring your whole self to work and you let the people you work with see who you are, again, just a little bit, and it's another case where just a little bit of experimenting, probably the way to get there, it can really actually have a surprisingly powerful effect on your career.
Well, that sounds pretty exciting, I think, for a lot of people, that they can take this information and start making changes in their life to develop that kind of balance. Because I can remember the days when someone, we'd work, the boss would give you a cell phone and you're on call if you like it or not. So, these kind of things make it really tough.
Yeah, and it's true. And increasingly, at least in Europe, that is in fact becoming illegal to have expectations of people outside of working hours. And even where it's not illegal in the United States, it's becoming something that we're having a conversation about. I remember years ago reading an article about Microsoft, and I'm in the Seattle area, so I guess I have to talk about Microsoft. Engineers at Microsoft were amazed that, they like wake up in the middle of the night having trouble sleeping or whatever, looking at their emails, or think of a question and send out an email to a colleague and be surprised to get an answer, within half an hour. That kind of thing was seen as a good thing then, but I think it's seen as a bad thing now. And there's a lot of rules out there and policies that experts recommend about not letting people think that they're expected to answer emails over the weekend or when they're or after hours, or worst of all, when they're supposed to be on vacation. I've heard of bosses who now in today's world would actually, if someone's on an email thread during vacation, might jump on the thread and say, "Hey, dude, you're supposed to be on vacation. Go away. Don't answer these." That's not every place, but it's a big change that's coming, I think.
Well, thank goodness for all these changes. They're well overdue. A lot of times women hit what they're called a glass ceiling. So, if we get to a position where we're feeling like that's there, how do we work around that?
It's hard. And and yeah, I don't have a solution for that, but I think the best we can do, a couple of things. So the first thing is, don't blame yourself. I think that in the book, I wrote about a time when I myself found that a colleague who was male, was making more money than me. And I did what I tend to do in that situation and came up with all kinds of reasons why that made sense. And it didn't occur to me until literally years later. It didn't occur to me until actually I was writing the book that the sexism was at play there. When of course it probably was, especially then. I mean, it was decades ago. But I think that often we come up with reasons why this isn't, why women aren't getting promoted, or why you yourself as a woman aren't getting promoted, or why you yourself as a person of color, or a disabled person, or gay person, or whatever, might not be getting the same treatment. And we don't necessarily, at least many of us don't necessarily want to call out bias, because that's painful. That's painful to even think about, to think that someone's treating you unequally just because of who you are, at a company where you enjoy working and want to stay. That's hard. So you have to find that balance between understanding that bias is there, and bias is often unconscious, and not letting it completely dominate, every interaction that you have and everything you think about your job. But I think what's really interesting is that the more we make an effort not to let these things hold us back, the more sometimes good things can happen. So this was not a scientific experiment. It was an entirely anecdotal, personal experiment, what I'm about to describe. But I just fell in love with this. In the course of the book, I read an article by a woman who had looked at some research that you probably have seen too, about how women won't apply for a job. Have you encountered this? Women won't apply for a job unless they're 100% qualified, whereas men can be like 60% qualified.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I've heard that one.
Right. Yeah. That was actually research that was done at HP, but it seems It's been picked up and repeated thousands of times because I think we all feel it's true. We kind of instinctively know it's true. And further research suggests that it's true for a really good reason, which is that women's qualifications will be scrutinized more closely, and a woman and man of equal qualifications are more likely on LinkedIn. I think more likely the recruiters are more likely to go for his resume than her resume. So there's some logic to that approach. But what I loved, this experiment that I loved, is this woman decided she was going to, as she put it, job hunt like a man. And so she started sending out applications to jobs that she felt underqualified for because a man would. And she said it was the hugest effort to not like send an apology. Gee, I'm so sorry. I'm applying for this job that I'm not really qualified for, but here's my application. She said she had to like stop herself from writing emails that said things like that. But she did it. She applied for these jobs. And to her surprise, she got interviewed for a lot of these jobs. And one of the jobs that was really like a much higher level than she thought she could get, she was invited in for an interview. And the recruiter asked her all these questions. And then the recruiter said, or the hiring manager said, well, you're not really qualified for this job. And the woman thought, oh, okay, I guess the game is up. But then the hiring manager said, but maybe that's not really what's most important. And she wound up moving her on to interviews with other higher ups and ultimately offering her the job. So it's interesting what can happen if, even though this bias is out there, we can at least free ourselves from the bias in our own heads. I'm not saying that's going to fix the problem because clearly it's no one's imagination. It's not in our heads. But the less we hold ourselves back and the less we expect to be treated unequally, the more opportunity there is for good things to happen, whether or not they definitely will.
Thank you for going over that. I think that that's so important to just give that type of encouragement to women, people of race or different genders, to just go out and address it as if you were just the qualified person in many regards.
Yeah, and that's not to say that that bias doesn't exist, because it absolutely does. And that's not to say that you'll always get treated fairly, because you absolutely won't. But and it's certainly not to say that you and I and everyone shouldn't be out there advocating for more fair treatment and more equity for everyone in the world of work and everywhere, because bias is everywhere. Because we absolutely do need to do that. But on an individual level, when you're looking at your own career, I think it's the best and the only thing to do.
You have a whole chapter in your book about dealing with toxic people. I first want to thank you for that. I think that it's such a great chapter for people to read and really kind of understand how to navigate through some of these. Can you share some of this with us?
Sure. So toxic people are part of life. In the book, I go through several different types of toxic people, people who try to manipulate you, people who dump a lot of anger all over you, people who really only ever think about themselves, which probably is, many bosses. Narcissists do tend to occupy the corner office, and people who are passive aggressive, which is probably my own greatest failing. But to generalize, there's really, most of the time, there's really only three ways to deal with a toxic person. The first, and the one that is probably most tempting for most people most of the time, is to somehow get away from them. Now, in your work, you might be able to, as I said before, get a lateral transfer, change jobs, work on a different project. Sometimes you can squirm away from a toxic person that you're stuck with at work, and sometimes not. Inside your family or circle of friends, it can get more challenging. But, this is why sometimes people say that they no longer deal with or avoid family members or whatever, because, toxic people are out there and sometimes it can be very destructive to be stuck around them. The other, a second way to deal with a toxic person, which works with some sort of people, particularly those who are, who will dump a lot of anger on you and, just be blustery, is to stand up to them and confront them. There's some people that, unless and until you stand up to them, are just going to push your buttons forever. So that's a second way to deal with a toxic person. But a third way that is incredibly difficult to do, but incredibly powerful if you can, is to flip the problem upside down and make friends with a toxic person. And I haven't managed to do this many times myself. I have a few times. It certainly isn't easy. It certainly won't always work. But if there's a toxic person in your life, including your work life, and you can't easily get away from them, it's a good thing to try. And I'll tell you why. Because people don't get toxic in a vacuum, and people usually aren't toxic, or at least not as toxic in all situations. So if you can get to know somebody who is making you crazy a little bit better, unpleasant as that might be, especially at first, two good things can happen. I'm not saying always will, but can happen. The first is you might get to understand the person better, and you might get to understand what's behind some of their behavior. And the better you understand them, the better you can figure out how not to do the things that push their buttons and cause them to be particularly toxic. And the better you understand them, the better you might also understand why they are the way they are, and you might feel better about them in general. The other thing that can happen is if you befriend a toxic person, they might feel better about you, and that might blunt a lot of whatever the behavior is that's making you uncomfortable. Doesn't always work. When it works, it's incredibly powerful. And another thing that I like to remember and remind people, and another thing I write about in that chapter, is that actually all of us, including everybody listening to this show, all of us have the potential to be toxic in different situations, even me. In the book, I wrote about an incredibly toxic thing I did, in my defense when I was very young. But we all have the potential to be terrible people in certain situations. And if we start out with that recognition, we can deal a little bit better with the terrible people we come across in our lives.
Do you find that when people are acting out, many times it has a lot to do just with that person and nothing to do with the people around them?
Often. And that can be very challenging, is not to take things personally. Another thing I write about a lot in the book is feelings at work, which is such a complicated question because on one hand, we all need to be human beings. And one of the things that I advocate for quite a lot is for people to be human beings in the workplace. But at the same time, a lot of the emotions that fly around in the workplace may not, as you say, have something to do with the person receiving the emotions. They could be triggered by something completely else. Especially somebody who's if you're in a position of low power and somebody in a position of higher power than you can take out some of those negative emotions on you at a lower risk than if they did it with someone else. So you may just find yourself in the hot seat because of that. At the end of the day, I sort of like to say, at the end of the day, your work will come to an end someday and your life will still be there, probably. So ultimately, the emotions that we bring to work need to be tempered a little bit with that understanding. And that can help you get a little bit of emotional distance when you're being unfairly treated by somebody who may be a toxic person.
Such great advice. I absolutely love the advice that you give. And, I know in your book, you also talk about detoxifying practices that we can use. What are some of those?
Um, well, I think mindfulness at work, that was actually a topic that surprised me a lot in writing the column, that there was a huge amount of interest in mindfulness. Um, I am a big believer in meditation. I'm not, I know that that doesn't apply to everyone. And the thing is that, although I totally encourage you to try meditation if you haven't, it's not necessary to really actually, sit in a corner and say or something to bring mindfulness into work. It can be as simple as stopping if something at work is upsetting you and taking a few deep breaths. And ideally, taking in an inhale that is shorter than your exhale. So inhale, count to 4, exhale, count to 6, for example, to say something super, super simple. There's the science behind that. The science behind that is that you have this thing called the vagus nerve that's the largest nerve in your body, and it regulates your heartbeat, and it will speed up while you're inhaling and slow down when you're exhaling. And so by exhaling at length, you slow your heartbeat, which physiologically tells your body, okay, things are all right, you can calm down. So that's the science reason for that. There are many different things you can do to kind of bring a little bit of mindfulness into the workday. Ideally, if you have control over where you work someplace where you can look out a window and see something in nature. If that's not possible, bring a little nature into your workspace, or even a picture that you can gaze at that makes you feel better. Make a little time every day during the workday to go outside, even if it's for 10 minutes. Especially if there's something like a park or even, a few trees or something around where you are. That simple act can really cut through the tensions of the day and help you manage everything that's going on and all the information that's coming at you. There's tons of research about the huge benefits of even just a small amount of nature in our days, even to the point where people in hospitals heal faster if they can look out the window and see trees than if they look out the window and see an air shaft or more buildings. It's not entirely clear why this is so powerful, but it really is. So those are a few simple things you can do to detoxify. There's many, many more, but that's a place to start.
Yes, you go over quite a few more in your book, and one that I found to be very powerful was journaling. I'd love for you to share a little bit about that with us.
Yes. I've been journaling my whole life. This is funny. This is sort of topical for me because I'm in a book group, and of course my book group read my book, and now all of them are journaling, to my surprise. It is a really powerful thing that people love to take up. So I like to say, one of the most potentially powerful tools you have for motivating yourself and achieving mindfulness costs like $6.99 at any bookstore or Staples. So journaling is one of these things that really, and I think this is the most important thing about it, that really anybody who takes up journaling should adapt it to what feels right and what works best for them, which is going to be different for everyone. So in the book, I lay out my recipe for what I call power journaling. And I encourage everyone to take, any part of it that works for them and, jettison any part of it that doesn't. So for me, I had spent my whole life using a journal, like from when I was a child, using a journal to express my moods, basically, to just, vent whatever was going on in my brain. I'm so mad at my boyfriend. Oh, I really hope I get this job. Oh, here's what I planted in my garden this year, like that. And then I watched the bullet journal instruction video, which takes 3 minutes to watch. If you're not familiar with bullet journaling, or maybe you are, but maybe your listeners aren't, it's a completely different form of journaling that is just there to gather and organize information. And so if you're using bullet journaling, you put your tasks that you want to accomplish, but also your schedule and bits of information you've collected all in one place. And then this is the brilliant thing about bullet journaling. You number your pages and index them so you can find that information when you need it. So what happened for me is that those two things combined to become something that really feeds my work planning and my career, because I use my journal. I do number the pages and index it so I can find stuff. And I use my journal to write down my plans for the week, tasks that I want to accomplish for the week, goals for the week, the month, the year, or the future. I want to do this in the future, but I don't have exactly when. A record of things that I've read, things that I want to do, and still, oh, I'm so mad at my husband, or whatever emotions I happen to be having. And combining that all in one place gives me a place to go back and check in with myself on a daily or weekly basis to see how I'm doing against the things that I want to do and how I'm evolving and progressing over time. It's important because of the way urgent tasks take over our time and attention on a daily basis. It brings me back to see what the longer term and more overarching important things are that I want to make sure really happen.
Do you find when we write it down like that, let's say for a year, then at the end of the year, we've really kind of accomplished a lot of the things we set out to do?
Yes. And I think that it's going to be different for different people. So I personally will never accomplish all the things that I write down just because I write down too many things. But when I look at them, I can see, when I've got them there in a list, I can see which are the ones that I really want to make sure happen and which are the ones that I really want to make sure happen, but I haven't been paying attention to them because I've been too busy focused on other things. And so, okay, now I have to make time for this. Okay, this is on my list of things that I intend to get done this week. Well, if I look at the list, I'm reminded, okay, I wanted to pitch this story to this editor this week. I wanted to make sure to reach out to this person this week. I wanted to make these improvements to my website this week, whatever it is. The things that don't really have deadlines, because interestingly, what I found is when you think about the stuff you want to accomplish and the stuff you really want to do, the things that you really want to do for the future, the things that are your hopes and aspirations, right? They usually don't have deadlines. If you want to apply to a contest or something and that has a deadline, okay, that may have a deadline. But most of the time, the things that have deadlines are things that you've already accomplished. Okay, I sold my book. Now I have a deadline to finish my book. I sold this customer on a huge project. Okay, now I have a deadline to finish the project. But you don't have a deadline to go out and do that selling. So if you don't put it there for yourself, if you don't write it down as a goal, it's so easy to just let it get forgotten.
I can understand that for sure. Oh my goodness, Minda. I mean, we could talk forever. I so loved your book, Career SelfCare. I thought it was such a relevant and great read. And I think it's actually timeless. It'll help people regardless if it's now or 5 years from now. Where can our listeners connect with you, be part of your community, and learn more about your work?
Probably the quickest and easiest place to go is my website, which is just mindazetlin.com. So just to spell it, it's mindazetlin.com. And from there, you can find my columns on Ink. You can find my newsletter that you could sign up for. You can find these texts that I send out. I send out a daily text that people sign up for, and then they get like a little bit of Minda in their inbox every day. And you can also, of course, find the book and my social media and everything else. So that's the greatest place to start looking for me anyway.
Well, thank you, Minda. It's been such an honor to have you on the show with us today.
Well, thank you. The time just flew by, I have to say.
Well, thank you, Minda. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Career SelfCare. Find your happiness, success, and fulfillment at work. Career SelfCare is available to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers, and if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order and, of course, support our indie bookstores. You can also purchase Career SelfCare directly from the publisher at newworldlibrary.com. Or visit Minda's website at mindazetlin.com. There you can learn about her articles for Inc.com and all the great information she has regarding workshops and her articles. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after this message from our sponsor. I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.